Redditors who grew up in the third world, what surprised you most about the first world? The size of everything. I was picked up from the airport in a Ford Expedition, which was about the size of my house back in Cuba, and then taken to a 6-bedroom house. I remember I used to feel uncomfortable in the big rooms, so I would hang out in closets and whatnot at first. On a side note, right before I left, my older brother told me that in the US you could tell the toilet to wipe you, and a hand would come out of the back to gently wipe your bottom. He went on to specify that I must ask in English, because if I asked in Spanish, the hand would put a finger in my ass. I didn't shit for a week. So I guess another surprise was normal toilets. Let me tell you a story. For the first few years of my life, I lived in a rainforest in a little leaf hut with my grandmother. No electricity, no running water, no cars. It was literally a rainforest, and I had no idea what the outside world was like. My father, who lived in Australia, he was deported from my country because my family didn't like him, then decided that at 7 I would have to come to Australia for my education. The whole experience was surreal to me. I remember flying on the plane and been so confused at how such a heavy thing could fly. Even the lights were amazing to me. Turning them on and off was like magic to my mind. When I landed in Australia, my father asked me if I wanted a drink of water, and my reply was, "There doesn't seem to be a river anywhere nearby, so how are we going to get it?" My dad then showed me a tap, and my mind was blown. Where was the river where this water was coming from? The refrigerator also blew my mind. In the village, if we had meat we would eat it immediately otherwise, and here was this magic machine that preserved it. He later asked if I wanted to go to the grocery store to get food for dinner. I replied with, "You don't have to grow your own food." My dad chuckled, and we went to the grocery store. I was amazed. Most of these foods I had never seen in my life, and there was so much of it. Also, I could eat any meat I wanted. I could keep going on with things that amazed me, but really there were so many. My uncle joined the Peace Corps and lived in Tonga, tiny island in the Pacific, for 2 years. One of his friends from his time there went on a trip to the US, and my uncle met her in LA. Anyhow, they got into a cab at the airport, and my uncle said that his friend had this terrible look of anxiety on her face and just kept looking around. Her head was just darting around every which way. He asked if everything was alright, and she said she was waiting for the high-speed chases, gunfire, and explosions. My uncle had to explain that those sort of things typically only happen in the movies. For her, the only window into the world outside Tonga was movies she had seen. It's interesting how media, or the lack thereof, can shape someone's perceived reality of the world. Honduran here who moved to Germany. Being able to walk in the streets with your phone in your hand was a bizarre feeling. How everyone was on time. Passengers on trains have little to no instructions, and mayhem doesn't break loose. Being able to find a ride online from a stranger and not be murdered along the way. How everyone respected convention. Once I saw a hat on the floor for about as long as I sat there, and no one picked it up. In Honduras it'd have been gone in less than a heartbeat. How they allowed, and protected, the Nazi party to hold a demonstration. In Honduras, they would have been repressed in no time. How I didn't really need a car. I was able to take public transportation with my expensive headphones, book and smartphone in full view. Oh, Deutschland, ich vermisse dich so sehr. No community in the first world. I live in Southern California, so I do hear it's different in other places in America. Growing up I knew all my neighbors. People would just walk into my house, show up for a quick bite to eat or coffee just because they were nearby. I currently live in a series of townhomes with most of my neighbors my age, and I know one of their names only because my roommate was hitting on her and freaked her out. I'm in a small farming community in Florida. Everybody knows everybody, because cows like to jump through fences, and you have to call your neighbors to come pick them up. Mostly it comes down to expecting lower standards, then being surprised when standards are higher, and then realizing that your third world view is affecting how you live in the first world. Having lived in a first world country for 10 years now, the difference from when I came here to now is huge. Gone are the old attitudes towards sexuality, race and money. You question how you ever thought life in a developing country was normal. You question things openly, not in fear of reprisal. There is open discourse on political issues. There aren't checkpoints at every intersection. People have an opportunity to be whatever they want. You notice things like trades jobs pay more relative to trades in a developing country. You get to see an economy in motion. You are served by and large, by a capable police force in the first world. Bribery is not rampant. Education is freely accessible. Electricity, running water. More than one national newspaper. A more open internet. Access to information. Great infrastructure for economical development. A chance to see public transit run efficiently. A ridiculous mixture of races and beliefs. A chance to know more than your limited worldview. And if you can't appreciate moving to a civilized part of the world, then maybe it should just chew you up and spit you out. I'm who I am today because I was given a chance to see things from a civilized point of view. I grew up in Kenya as a child, and when I finally returned to the first world, I was surprised how relaxed everyone was about not being mugged from. I worked at a hospital in Kenya earlier this year, and the interns there wouldn't let my brother or I go home walking after 7 p.m. because they said it was just too dangerous. We were staying at a church 500 meters down the road that wouldn't take more than 3 minutes to get to. Constantly people would tell us to watch our valuables, and it became so pessimistic that when we were left in that mindset for about a month. Edit. Since this got some attention I thought I'd add another story. I was working in surgery my first morning in the hospital, and 2 men with head injuries came in. The nurses there told me there had been a hijacking at a petrol station at 4 in the morning that day. They had pulled machetes and slaughtered 4 people right there and then. These 2 had been lucky. One had his entire skull cracked inwards, like when you drop a boiled egg with the shell still on. He had to have his skull drilled apart and replaced in the correct position. The second guy had bleeding between the skull and the dura mater, a meningeal layer of tissue that should be attached directly to the skull. His skull was also drilled apart, and the bleeding was soaked up before the skull was correctly positioned and his skin sewn back up. I left 3 weeks later. Guy 1 was barely responsive, still couldn't talk, however, could move his eyes. A vegetable pretty much. Guy 2 was being discharged when I left. TLDR. Kenya, although incredibly beautiful, is pretty messed up. How much food gets served and or thrown away. Also how much fresh produce costs compared to fast food. Having visited South Africa, the price of food in general, even with a conversion rate, everything was at least half the price they sell it in Europe. I used to work in a bakery. Each night, we would throw out at least 6 to 8 big bags of fresh bread and cakes. It's devastating to think about all those people who are in hunger, and there I was, throwing out perfectly fine food all because of some stupid chain store policy. My roommate worked at Big Town Hero for a long time, and they'd always have a huge bag of bread to get thrown out. We were pretty broke, so we'd just get cheap sandwich fixings and use that bread to make sandwiches all the time. He tried to get his boss to donate it, but he said it would cost too much to be worth it. Groan. It doesn't cost much if somebody steals it. If you know what I'm saying. Wink wink, nudge nudge, say no more. That's what I used to do with day-old pastries that we had to throw out when I worked at a convenience store. Bag them up in a nice clean bag and leave them outside just around the corner of the store, because I need to get the rest of the trash together, and then I'll take it all to the dumpster in one trip. Then it would mysteriously disappear. I never got in trouble, because even on camera I was bagging them up and taking them out. I almost got fired from a shitty gas station job for this. We had a camp of homeless folk in the woods behind the building that I had formed friendships with, and would give them the throwaway food. After getting a serious reprimand for it, really? Like a homeless person has the means to sue you over 3-hour-old taquitos. I just bagged everything up very nicely and would sit the bags of food on an empty milk crate behind the dumpster, so if caught they wouldn't get in trouble for trespassing. Duck all that noise. This kinda worries me. I work at a large gas station, and I have one homeless friend named Jim. Well, without him I'd probably get robbed or taken advantage of a lot. I'm a female working till well past 11 p.m., so it gets creepy. He stays with me and helps me daily with the outside trash. In return I give him fresh fruits and hygiene kits. I don't care if they fire me over it, but I worry if I'm not there then, will anyone else be there? You're a good person. Thank you. The taste of fruit and vegetables in the sense of community. Maybe this is just because fundamentally my family is quite antisocial, but when we lived in Zimbabwe and Uganda, my brother and I were constantly visiting friends and the friends of our parents. But since I've moved to Canada, I only occasionally see my friends outside of school. Elaborate on the taste thing please. In Zimbabwe and Uganda, the fruit and veggies taste so much fresher, but it's more than that. I find that food in Canada is so overloaded with sugar that it's hard to taste the sweetness in fruit. In Uganda especially, most food does not have extra sugar added, so fruit and candy are pretty much the only sources of sweetness. Another thing is the amount of time it takes to get fresh fruit here in Canada. The fruit has to be transported from faraway places. In Uganda, it's like, boom. Straight from the tree to the plate. It's hard to explain, but fruit in Africa tastes deliciously different from fruit here. Bit late to the party but whatever. My father grew up in Sri Lanka, and if you've ever been to any South Asian country you'll know that the roads are deadly, and nobody stops for anyone. He said the thing that surprised him most was when he went to England to study, and people stopped at the crossing waiting for the man to turn green. When the man turned green, he said it was like magic that the cars all stopped to let people cross the road. One of the things that amazed me the most about England was that in some parts of the road there are no lights, and people are allowed to cross whenever they need to, and cars stop. I even pulled people back, and they were like, no, it's okay, the cars will stop. Everything just works. Banks have no armed guards, and while you're banking, you have no fear that someone at the bank is spotting to see if you take money out, only to rob you a block away. You stop at a traffic light at 3 AM, and you actually wait for it to turn green again. You don't just do a rolling stop and run the light for fear of someone hiding in the bushes nearby, jumping at you to take your car. A package is delivered to your front door while you're away. You can be 99.9% sure it will still be there by the time you make it home. Nobody is going to steal it. You have a problem with a company or a product, you can be reasonably certain that company will try to make it right, and not just laugh when you call to complain. If you call the police, they'll actually come to your house. Same for ambulances and firefighters. You pay taxes, but you have good roads, hospitals, police, infrastructure, phone, street lights, water, etc. Politicians caught stealing are out of public life, with no hope of being elected again. Streets are generally clean and free of graffiti. If you need the justice system, it works reasonably well. Nobody is going to get away with murder because they have connections to a judge. All of these things are non-existent in the third world. Edit. Keep in mind exceptions. People. Not all third world country cities are like this, and some first world cities sure have their problems. For the record, I came from Brazil, and I live in South Florida now. When I first moved here from the Philippines, I was surprised just how ducking clean it was. Holy shit, I felt like I could eat off of every goddamn surface of the airport, whereas the airport in the Philippines would probably give you herpes if you sat down somewhere. Everything wasn't jam-packed to the ducking gills and nobody was pissing in the street. What surprised my grandmother when she saw Finland was how conservative people were with land usage here. In Nigeria, during imperialism, and thereafter, a lot of land has been wasted in grand architecture. I remember going to the university there. From entering the front gate we had to drive what was at least half a mile before reaching the first building. Otherwise it was just all grass,